Welcome to the LB's, the Lover of Books author chat. Now to introduce this New York Times bestselling author. Ann Napolitano's novel, Hello Beautiful, was published by Dial Press in March 2023 and was an instant New York Times bestseller and on the 100th Oprah Book Club pick. That's amazing. It currently has 23 international publishers. It has been described as a sumptuous family saga, one of those rare novels whose singular characters are so beautifully rendered. It's as if they are our best friends and you're grateful to be in their orbit, says Oprah Daily. She received her MBA or MFA from NYU. She has taught fiction writing for Brooklyn's College MFA program, NYU's School of Continuing and Professional Studies, and for Gotham's Writers Workshop. In November 2019, Anne was longlisted for the Simpson Joyce Carol Oates Literary Prize. She now lives in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 children. Let's welcome Anne here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited. There's been all kinds of buzz. We couldn't even hold ourselves in. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just dive right in. I'm going to let everybody know, and I think we've talked about this. I will start off general with questions, but it will get to spoilers. So if you have not read it, I will try to give a warning, and because everybody here wants to really deep dive into this book, okay? So let's go ahead and just start right off. There's so many themes in this novel. Was there one in particular that you grasped onto that really started this novel, or was it some other seed or idea that really pushed it in?
There are 3 or 4 things. One is I had this idea of this lonely little boy dribbling a basketball, and I knew that was going to be in the start of the book. I had developed an obsession with the history of basketball in the few years before I started this book, and I couldn't read enough about the history of basketball. And I knew that somehow that was going to work its way into this novel. I didn't understand why, but I knew that was going to be the case. And I also had this thought that actually comes from my prior novel, Dear Edward, where Edward, the little boy, lives next door to a girl named Shay, who's the same age as him. And Shay's father, we find out, left when she was a baby, and she has no relationship with him. And just sort of as a side thing, when I was writing that, I thought, Shay does not need a father. She's this powerful, independent young woman, and it's his loss. And she has a mother who loves her very much, and she doesn't need a dad. And I thought, I wonder what would happen if, when Shay was grown up, circumstances brought her together with her father for the first time, when she really didn't need him anymore, which led me to think about writing a story where that came to pass, where a father and daughter were separated and then came back together. And also, my mother is from a large Irish Catholic family, and all of her 5 brothers and sisters stayed in northern New Jersey, near where I grew up, except for one, my Uncle Ed, who moved to Chicago, to the neighborhood of Pilsen. And when I was little, he would send me postcards the salutation was "Hello Beautiful." And they would be images from Chicago and from the neighborhood he lived in, Pilsen, which is this mural covered neighborhood in Pilsen. And I knew that my uncle didn't really know what I looked like, because he had 20 million nieces and nephews, and he hardly ever saw me. So I felt like he saw that I was beautiful on the inside. And as a shy, bookish child, that made sense to me, and it made me feel good. And when I started this book, I thought, oh, that is how this 4 sisters' father would greet his daughters, by saying "Hello Beautiful." And the power in that to draw their specific beauty to the surface. So it was a few of those things that led me into beginning the story.
All right. We just consumed so much. I'm going to piecemeal this because that was just too good of little tidbits. Okay. Let's start with your fascination with basketball. Where did that come from? You don't hear that too much. I have this love. Tell us.
Well, I grew up playing soccer, and my husband is English and he plays soccer, and my 2 sons play soccer too. But so it doesn't really make sense. But when a few years ago, I started reading about the history of social justice in this country because of the sort of rising in consciousness that we all had. And I was really fascinated to find that the history of basketball in America really runs in parallel and overlaps with the social justice movement and the civil rights movement in this country, really to this day. And with like pivotal figures like Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And when I teach fiction writing, which I do occasionally, I always tell my students that as writers, they have to pay attention to their obsessions and to like, I think for all of us, that I think of it as like all of us have like a specifically calibrated magnet board that like fills our torso. And your magnet board is different than your partner's or your twin sister or your best friend. So like what pulls to your board is really specific to you. And I think it benefits all of us, but if you are an artist or a writer, you really have to pay attention to what pulls to your board, because there's something in that that has to do with the themes that you are writing towards. And a sign, actually, I tell my students, for when the obsession does have to do with your work is when it really doesn't make sense to you and might even be like slightly awkward or embarrassing. I had an older woman who was in one of my writing classes a few years ago, and I was talking about this thing and paying attention to her obsessions. And she raised her hand and said that for her whole adult life, every morning when she drank her coffee, she would like scan the newspaper looking for stories about dead babies. And she had never told anybody because it seemed to say terrible things about her. But this was making her think, there was something in that, was calling to her that had to do with her work, which made her feel slightly less creepy about it. And I was like, yes, exactly. Like it's often something that doesn't make any sense or even that you feel uncomfortable about. And I mean, basketball, I didn't feel terribly uncomfortable about, but it really made no sense. But I knew enough by this point in my writing career that when something pulls to me like that, and it's like I can't get enough of it, and I get really excited by every nonfiction basketball book I read, then I just completely give in, and I'm just curious about where it's going to lead me.
So I think your magnetic board then translates into William some. I can see bits and pieces of you within that character.
Yeah, sure. And I think I'm in, this is my most personal novel, even though what actually happens in the book hasn't happened to me, but I see myself in all of the characters, basically, except for Julia and Rose, which is not to say anything negative about them. I don't share as much DNA with those two characters, but everyone else, basically, there's something of me in them.
How hard was it to write Rose and Julia then without having that personal touch in those characters?
Well, Julia was the most challenging, I think, for that reason. Rose was fun, actually. I mean, she says the things that, you sort of wish you would have the courage to say, but never would, or like the mean side of you that, you would never say out loud. But because Julia has such a pivotal part in the story, and when the sort of situation in the story comes to a head, certainly for Julia, Sylvie, and William, it requires like great change for them in a moment of great stress and sort of unprecedented drama in their lives. And it's easier for me as the writer to figure out what that change is going to feel and look like if I share DNA with the characters. Julia is the one I had to rewrite that section over and over again to just nail down and be like, is this true? Is this true? Would she really do this? It just took me longer with her because I think I just shared less connection, and I was less feeling my way into her than I could with the other characters.
So, and people, I'm sorry, I'm already jumping right on into spoilers. I just can't help myself with this one. It's too good. So we are diving in. Would you consider any characters in this book to be a villain then, or not?
No, I mean, I never think of any of the characters that I write as villains. I certainly think of some of them as difficult people, but I don't see them that way. Because for me to get them, my goal in writing the book, one of my goals is to make sure just that I get it right, that I get the reactions, the events, the interactions between the characters, like so that I think of it as writing, holding an emotional tuning fork, like a musical tuning fork, where I'm like, it's true, it's true, it's true, it's true. And so I understand what all the characters do. And as long as I understand what they do, then I can't possibly view them as bad. I understand where they're coming from and I understand what they're trying to achieve.
Well, I love that you gave each of them such a distinct point of view. And so I want to tie it into Little Women then, because you talked about, these catalysts that got it going, but Little Women worked their way into this novel. So at what point did that happen and why?
Not at an early point. It did not occur to me. I have like 9 months before I actually start writing the book that I don't let myself write. I only let myself think, research, and take notes. And it's a way for me to try and use my brain to figure out as much as I can before I start writing, which is a more intuitive, lyrical process. And I can't think while I do that. And in all my thinking in those 9 months, Little Women never occurred to me. But so about 80 pages into the book, when I was writing a scene with the four sisters and they started arguing over which of them was Joe, I was like, oh, of course, there's four of them, there's four March sisters. And, William is this lonely boy on the outside and Laurie is a lonely boy on the outside in Little Women. And I loved Little Women when I was little. But it took the sisters in the book for me to actually realize that was in there. And once I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, of course. And also that's fun and interesting for me to play with.
How long did it take you? Like you said, 9 months for the research thought process. And then how long did it take you to write it?
2 years, which is the fastest actually that I've ever written a book. Dear Edward took me 8 years, and the book before that took me 8 years too. So this book really, the experience was different. Then I wrote it basically starting in April 2020, the very beginning of the pandemic. And it really was an escape for me. And it also just grabbed me and pulled me in this very full on way where I felt like the book was taking place inside me and I was feverish with it. And the only way for me to find any peace was to get it right and to do justice to these characters and do justice to this story. So I wrote whenever I wasn't parenting or, being a wife or, various other required activities, I was writing or thinking about this book. It just would not let go of me.
So a couple of things there. The way you described your need to write sounds like Sylvia's love, the way she describes love. And so I'm wondering, do you think that personal touch, that personalness that you brought of yourself into the novel, do you think that's why it was so much faster?
Yes. I think that I was writing the book that I needed in that moment. I did start writing in the beginning of the pandemic when we were in New York City, certainly really on lockdown. And my father also died in April 2020. And because of the timing of the pandemic, timing of where we were in the pandemic, we weren't able to be with him when he died, and we weren't able to gather after he died, which so many other people went through during that time period. But when I started the book, I had never felt so inside out and upside down and in need of understanding the world and the people and what could possibly be in the future or how we could reconnect, etc. So I felt all open nerves, and I wrote the book that I needed in order to move through that period of time as much as I did to write the story of William and the Padavano sisters, which was a very, I just had never been in that situation before.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss. But I am so glad that you had this outlet as a form of therapy in a lot of ways to work through emotions. And I will tell you, when I got to the end of the book, when you said, what would he have said? And it said, hello, beautiful. I lost it. And so I think the personal touch that you brought to the book just added so much emotion for all of us readers and makes us so connected. I think it was just a beautifully done, and thank you for exposing yourself and your emotions, because we all attach to those. So I know I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here, I hope, but it's very appreciated. The other thing I want to talk about is William's reaction to handing over his manuscript. Is that your reaction? Like, I mean, it was nervousness. I mean, he was lots of anxiety. Is that something that you also feel when that first handover to either your first readers or to your, to your editors, or how is that something that comes from a personal place as well?
No, not really. I mean, I guess I can relate to it as a teacher of fiction writing. Like, I do recognize that when you're teaching a workshop, that it really has to be a very safe place, because people are often handing over stories that are, though they're fictional, are, terrible things that have happened to them in real life. Or it's the first time they've ever had someone else read their work, and so they're very vulnerable. Um, I I mean, I have been writing for so long and been through so many workshops, and I have two first readers that I went to graduate school with, that I'm about as thick skinned as you can be when handing things over. Like, I want you to tell me it's terrible. I mean, only if it actually is terrible, but I don't want you to tell me, that it's good if it's not good. I am handing it over so that I can find out how I can make it better, basically. And I feel pretty sturdy in that way. For William, it is more like a journal, or like a desperate attempt on his part to like stitch himself together. So it is him handing over really like the inside of himself. And he's handing it to Julia, who he knows isn't going to welcome the fact that he's broken on the inside. So he's in a really difficult position, which happily I don't relate to as far as like handing my own work over.
The other part that I found interesting with the handing over the manuscript is how much Sylvia could read about him within it. And she was able to admit that that's when she started to fall in love with him, is seeing his insides and seeing what he called the struggle inside. Have you ever, I mean, because you are a teacher as well, and then on the other side, you are a writer. Do you think that have you seen that happen? Like, just that writing is really your core and allows people to fall right in love with you, seeing that inner.
Well, I don't.
It's just so fantastical. Like, I mean, it's so something Sylvie, in her dramatic flair.
Yeah.
I love it though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think one of the things that I'm certainly writing about in the book that I feel really strongly about, and that I was working my way through, is the idea of how important it is to feel seen, to feel seen for who you are and the situation you're in right now. And also like seen in your potential to be something different. It's so powerful, and we crave it so badly as humans. And when someone looks at you and doesn't see something that you don't recognize as yourself, or sees who you want them to be, or who they hope you will become, it disconnects you so drastically from that person, but also in a way from yourself. It's really damaging. And William, who doesn't really know who he is because he was unloved as a child, he sort of lacks this sort of infrastructure inside himself. He couldn't love himself because he was never loved. It's very tricky for him. And for Sylvie to look at him through his writing and see the state that he's in, and just inherently accept him in that state, is the first step for him. Not really even necessarily in falling in love, but in becoming himself. He still has further to break down, but it opens a door to a different future for him. So I'm definitely interested in that. I have this like working hypothesis that keeps being disproved, that you can tell whether someone is a jerk by the book that they write. Like, if a really big-hearted, beautiful novel, I'm like, there's no way that person isn't wonderful as like that author, as a person. But other people in my life are like, no, that guy's not nice at all. And I'm like, but his novel is so big-hearted and beautiful. So I'm not sure, like, if people are seeing me or not. I can't say either way, because I could be like a total monster, but
We don't believe you're any kind of monster. But last month was Mental Health Awareness Month. And for me, this book was such a great book to represent that and to bring awareness. Why was that so important and such a big overarching theme? And why did you want to highlight that? Because it was, to me, one of the biggest throughout for us to be aware of.
I mean, really, I set out to write the story of this boy who grows up in a home without love. And then I needed to figure out what that would do to him and how he could walk away from that and what he could walk towards and whether he could ever be quote unquote okay or not. And I didn't know whether that was possible. So it was really about following his path as truthfully as I could. And it was important to me, certainly, but in part of being truthful was he wasn't going to like become terrific. Like there simply was no way that that was going to be the case and that he was going to need to take his medication every day for the rest of his life, even, on the worst day of his life towards the end of the book. I want to show each character's full humanity as accurately as possible. And for William, that meant exploring, what his mental health, was, became, and remained as he grew older.
Well, it was, and we did see that journey, and not only that, but we saw the family around him and their journey. No one was perfect with it, but there were so many different approaches and reactions, and I thought that's important to see as well and to experience as a reader, because it is different for everyone. And so, like you said, you're not a villain. It's just how that in that situation, how that person reacted. So it was, to me, I think I was very. I mean, it's hard to read mental illness. I'm not saying it's a fun yay, but it's an important one for me. And so I was very grateful that you took this so seriously. And it seemed like there had to be a lot of research in that topic.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I did a lot of reading. I have a few people that are close to me that are therapists and have worked in, psychiatric units. And I have people in my life who have suffered from, severe clinical depression. And I think we all do, though. That's the thing. It's also so prevalent. And I don't want to turn away from anything that is so common among us in my writing, because that's an untruth in itself. All of us know somebody who suffers terribly, at least one person, from depression and or anxiety, or who has, had a terrible childhood situation and is still trying to piece themselves back together even when they're 55.
Absolutely. You described it as hanging off the fender, which it was, very graphic, and you could just picture that strife. And then you also went into talking about living a life that was different from living, and the difference between being calm and being disconnected. And that DNA there, I could see it coming up later with Alice, how she had become calm and disconnected and started to realize, but she had no clue why this was happening because it had never been addressed. So that was a very neat connection without having to spell it out. Another big theme was friendship, the acceptance as who you are. Like Sylvie and Kent really were beacons, I think, in this realm for William, but also the role of the team. To me, they were extremely impressive. And I was on a team in college, and I just loved that camaraderie. I could feel it, and I thought you did it justice. So thank you for that. Why was it important to bring in that portion, both individually and as a team support system for him?
I think that's part of why I wanted to write about basketball. I mean, just because it allowed me to write about, I played soccer growing up. I was on numerous teams. I have a friend who just told me recently that she played Division I soccer in college at UVA or something. Very good athlete. And her soccer team was incredibly close. And obviously for 4 years, they played together. And one of their teammates, they're now like 45. And one of their teammates had cancer, breast cancer in the last year. And she finished her treatment and was going to ring the bell. You ring a bell at the end of your chemo protocol. And her whole team flew in and surprised her to be there with her when she rang the bell, which like made me cry because it's so moving. But it's like teams can be this amazing system that, particularly for someone like William, but really for misfits and oddballs across the board, a team gives you a place, and you're not supposed to be like everyone else on your team. Actually, you need every type in order to make the whole. You can't have all like amazing quarterbacks or, like all charming stars. You need role players, you need everyone, and everyone has a place, which means they can all care for each other. And I think that when you're in that framework, particularly, this is a generalization, but for men in particular who have a hard time often, showing emotion to each other or feeling like they can reach out and love somebody, like William arriving on that team, it gives Kent sort of the honor and the privilege, and the other teammates too, of helping this young man who really needs help, which is really, something that we're lucky enough to be able to do for a handful of people during our lifetime. And the fact that they're on a team together gives them the right and a place to do it. So I think there's something very beautiful in that. And also like hopeful, because you can put like your misfit kid on a team and be like, this organism, provides a kind of exoskeleton for them in best case scenario. So yeah, it was really satisfying and enjoyable to write about a team.
Well, I also loved that, you're talking about the oddball, height. I played volleyball at Rice, and we'd walk through an airport and they'd be like, oh, y'all play basketball? No, actually we play volleyball. So I love that you brought in those two sports as well. But the fact that you address the difference between tall and petite and how those women are perceived in society, because I think even to this day, that still is an issue that continues. I mean, I think it's addressed a little bit more that volleyball, I think, is one of the fastest growing. It is probably the fastest growing women's sport now, and I think it's becoming more acceptable with height. But it's still, the comments that you get are that the insecurities of other people because of your height. And I was the shortest one on the team at 5'8", so it was, I could see it. And so why did that come in? Just because you knew Alice had to be tall, and so you wanted to talk about those issues?
Yeah, and I grew up, my sister's best friend when we were young was this and is this kick-ass young woman named JJ, who was 6'1" when we were like freshmen in high school. And she was a really magnificent athlete, which I think helps, like that gives you a place to put that sort of extreme height. But when I started thinking about the book and realized that Alice was going to be very tall because William was very tall, I reached out to JJ and was like, tell me everything about what your experience has been and what people have said to you, and like what the hangups that people have that they project onto you because of your size. And I knew she could handle it. Like I wasn't going to be like hurting her feelings, or she's like really just awesome. And so it was really fun to use her life experience to, expose that. And she says too, she thinks it's much better now than it was when we were growing up. Like there is an understanding that it's like, you can be like, well, that woman is like awesome and kick-ass and super strong and amazing. When I was younger, it would just be like, she's a freak, which is, when JJ was younger. But it was a really interesting thing to explore. And it's a way to look at like gender dynamics and sexism and, other things that interest me.
Well, talking about Alice and comparing her to Izzy, they grew up, I mean, they're a month apart, right? But they grew up in different parts of the US with parents with totally different philosophies. Izzy gets probably more than she wants to know from her mother. And yet she does not want to know who her father is. Like, it's like, don't even tell me, I don't need it. Yet there's Alice, whose mother will not tell her anything, yet she is just can't get it. Like she wants to know, she has to know, but can't. And so, I mean, they're in stark opposition. How was that? I'm assuming that was intentional to have them mirror a little bit.
Yeah, almost nothing is like, well, very few things am I like truly intentional about. So it's usually I can just see it when I've done it, afterwards. But, I knew that Izzy was growing up in a completely different situation. And I knew that I thought Izzy's situation was better, like for the child. And that what Julia was doing with Alice was limiting her, even though I don't actually, I think Julia is a very loving, devoted, committed mother. But I think making Alice's life that small took a toll. And also just, she lost a lot. Like she lost all those years with that family that loves her so much. So it's not like I think, I think both girls are going to end up great young women and surrounded by family, basically by the end of the book. But I think Alice will always miss the childhood that she could have had.
But yet she's handed this book of memories to help ease her into that transition. What do you what was your intention for that gift?
I didn't know where I was going with the book that Sylvie was writing. I didn't know that she was going to end up it was going to end up being given to Alice. It was sort of like I reached the end of the book and I was like, oh, this young woman is missing all the history, like all the days and the scenes and the stories of this family. And this woman has written them down. So like, it just seemed like I was writing in that direction the whole time without knowing it. And also I was just like, there is no better gift to hand Alice, and Sylvie's gone and she would have loved to be there to love her and to like, just to be in her life, and she can't be, but she's giving, in her absence, she's giving her the greatest gift that anyone could probably give her other than the family itself. So it had, a beautiful symmetry to it.
Well, so did the copyright editor job come first and then it just happened that the book ends up, or did she become a copyright editor because the gift was like chicken and egg art?
No, she was copy editor first. Like I write everything chronologically. And the last thing that I write basically is the end. I rewrite the first like 2/3 of the book for the majority of the time, because it's like, I think of it as like building a house, and the foundation and like the first floor has to be rock solid in order for me to build the top. And also in many ways, the hope with any ending for me is that I'm going to like leap off a cliff and all these things are going to come together. And there's like it requires a kind of like abandon and like total preparation. So like everything's ready and then I jump. I don't want to be jumping over and over again. I want to try to get them whatever magic I can, once or twice, as opposed to like the 37 times that I rewrite the stuff earlier in the book. So she was a copy editor in, as far as I was concerned, it was because she was, again, trying to like control life and keep it small and safe and tidy and like fix all the mistakes that she could. And, like it was a job that didn't have a big future. It didn't have a ladder to climb. She was just like keeping her own life limited the same way her mother had limited her life, because she now feels safe that way. And then it ended up, that this manuscript even made more sense.
Well, I thought I really thought that she had the manuscript earlier, that Sylvie had been secretive and given the manuscript because she mentioned the women to her mother. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's been reading as a copy editor all this time. And then later it switched. But I was like, oh, that was close.
But that's so interesting. Nobody said that to me. That's very interesting.
The other question I have for you personally, there's a scene between Sylvia and William where you say, I guess Sylvia says, this is when she comes in about the basketball and how she gets to connect with him. She wants to turn on his pilot light. So my question to you is, obviously basketball was something that turned on your pilot light, but what is it else? What else can you give us? Like, what else is a pilot light for you that just turns you on?
For me, it's writing. Like, if I don't write, then I feel depressed is not the right word, but it's like the light inside me goes out. Like I'm just half of myself, and I'm not great for anyone or with anything. But when I am writing, it's just this like delicious excitement inside of me when I have a new book going on, or I have a book going on inside myself, because I'm just like, oh, what will happen next? Like it's a gathering and a like a sort of a ignition of kindling, which that's it. Like it's loving the people that I love, and it's writing.
Well, we are glad that that is your pilot light, because we all get to benefit from that love, and keep that thought, because we're going to come back to that at the end. I want to talk about how cyclical it is for life with this. When you talk about when Izzy comes into the world, the father, Charlie, leaves. And then when Alice comes in, Rose leaves. And so at first, when you talked about, Sylvia getting sick, and then the picture of his sister comes in, I thought, oh, is that the moment? Is that the thing that he's getting, is this memory? And then when he took it out and gave it to his sister-in-law, I thought, oh, it's Alice. Is that foreshadowing? And it was, I loved this cyclical theme of all of it. So I just wanted you to talk about that, because to me, it was a lot of this book feels like that, has that, go back to what their parents said or what their parents would think, and ancestors and saints. And, I just wanted you to discuss it, because I loved that.
Oh, thank you. It's one of those things where I didn't realize it. Like certainly didn't realize it until after both babies were born, because Izzy and Alice, like you said, were born on a day that one of their parents left, one way or the other. And then Cecilia, again, it was Sylvie noticed it. And I was like, oh yes, that's interesting. And it was about, Julia leaving her sister's lives, and this sort of gaping hole that was there, and whether they could be whole without her. There was a lot of leaving and then waiting for a rearrival happening for all of them. It just kept it was like a cadence and a rhythm within the book. And someone at some point wonders, I think it's William towards the end, if life is just made up of arrivals and departures. And in a way, it is. We lose people, babies are born, new loves are found. We're either opening or closing doors all the time. And it just seemed, with this book covering so many years, it's, I always forget, it's like 40 years or something like that. It's natural that that's going to happen, within the life of this family. And so it was it was like a part of like the sort of steam engine of this book was the chugging of these arrivals and departures that sort of happened organically. And by the time I realized them, it was when William and Sylvie were realizing them too, towards the end of the book. And I too wondered, what is the arrival going to be that, with Sylvie leaving? And I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure for a long time whether Alice was going to come back or not. I thought it might be Julia.
And on top of that, we get Walt Whitman's poetry to just help with that passing and that transition. Why did you want to bring him in and his quotes?
And he came in with Charlie, the father, who is a lover of poetry and whose favorite poet is Whitman. I've always loved Whitman, and this is more minor, like tugging obsession, where I read about 4 books about Whitman during the writing of this book, because I kept thinking, he keeps coming up, and is there more there that I just don't know about him yet that I need to know in order to write this full story. And there was more about Whitman in the book, and my editor was like, too much Whitman, which is totally fair enough, and she was right. But that's why he really came. It wasn't intentional. He came with Charlie. Often the characters come with their own obsessions or their own passions, and then I have to learn about them so that I can fully serve that character.
Anything else major hit the chopping block that didn't make the book that we see today?
I mean, the two things that got chopped the most were like nonfiction history about basketball, more of like what William wrote about. I wrote too much. And then sort of like the dorky details about Whitman's publications. And then the other two things was that I wrote chapters from Izzy and Rose's points of view too. And my editor and agent were like, that's too many heads that you've gone into. So I took those out as well. But that's very like there's no way that I can get through a book without like overwriting. It's part of the process, and then being like, okay, what story am I telling and who needs to tell it?
Well, I will say that this book was a good companion to watching Air with the Michael Jordan. So if anybody hasn't watched that, I found it was excellent, and I thought that was just an interesting tidbit with the Chicago references. So I liked that as well. I've heard very different approaches to reading this book. For me, I read through it, but then when I got to the heavy grief of Sylvie, I had to stop and put it down and absorb that grief and allow myself to process. And then I could pick it back up and read some more. And then others have said when they found out, they had to read it straight through because they had to know how this was going to, end up. And so I was wondering, especially now knowing, about your personal experience with losing your father, how it was to write this emotionally, one during quarantine, right? Because it was a different emotional time than what you would normally be writing in, and knowing how hard of a topic this is.
Yeah. Well, during that 9 months of thinking and researching and taking notes, I figured out like 4 things that I knew were going to happen in the book. I'm never 100% sure, but that just kept sticking. And I was like, okay. And one of them was that Sylvie was going to have this diagnosis. So I knew that from the beginning, but I also knew it was when she was in her 40s, and we were starting the book when she was 18. So there was a lot of story I had to tell before I got there. And I'd also knew, like, as I built towards it, it was hard. I mean, I loved Sylvie, but I knew that something huge was going to have to happen in order for there to be any chance of this family coming back together. And that was a huge thing to have happen. So I feel like writing the book was a very intense experience for me, just generally. Like I said, I felt like I was feverish with it. So in a way that felt as fevered as anything else, but not more so. It was just like, then it was that really, kicks in the last segment of the book. And I could feel like all these pieces coming in, these threads being woven together. So it was also exciting to me to see what was going to happen. I could feel like it was just about to happen. And when you've been writing a book for like hundreds of pages, that's a very exciting feeling where you're like, oh my God, all these like things that I threw up in the air are going to land, and I'm not sure exactly where. So even though something very sad is happening, I'm also excited at the same time about what that's going to mean, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think we're going to have some people that are feverishly wanting to ask you some questions. If you have a question, get those ready while you're thinking about them. I have my rapid fire questions for you. So don't get nervous. It's just one or the other. So just don't even think, just answer. All right. Are you ready? Chicago or New York City?
New York City.
City or suburb?
City.
House or an apartment?
House.
Subs or pizza?
Pizza.
Chicago deep dish or other?
Other.
Bulls or warriors?
Warriors.
Oral, written, or art history?
Written.
Book or audiobook?
Both.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Favorite Little Women sister?
Joe.
On to favorite Padavano sister?
It's really hard for me actually, but probably Sylvie.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, you should have questions ready. Are y'all ready to ask? If anybody else, go ahead and raise your hand and I will get you on screen. If not, oh, we do. Anissa, here we go. Go ahead and unmute. Yes.
Thank you, Laura Beth. Thank you. And you and I have connected several times over the years with Read with Jen, and I'm very curious at what I love Dear Edward and this book, but what did you learn from writing Dear Edward that transferred over and helped you to be a better writer when you were writing Hello Beautiful, since it obviously was a much more compressed time of you writing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I do think that I'm like a slow developer in every way. And Dear Edward came out when I was 48 and I had been writing, since I was a child basically, but like, in a very full on way for my entire adult life. So my goal personally is to write a better book than the last one. And my end goal is to have a shelf of books that I'm proud of all of them. And that's it. Like I have no control over anything that happens in the marketplace or, book clubs or any of those things. And I think that Dear Edward taught me a tremendous amount about like the emotional truth of people's lives being what I am really fascinated by, and me figuring out how I could make that a story in a way that I hadn't been able to figure out before. Now I know that that's like where I'm headed when I know that that's the ground that I am fascinated by and that I want to walk on. So I just head right there, which makes it doesn't make it easier, but it makes it more clear, and I can get to the story that I want to tell and like dig into it more easily, more quickly than I could before when I didn't know what my, sort of language was.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody else have a question that they want to ask of Ann? If not, I'm going to keep asking. So if I see a hand up, I'll go to you. I love that even without reading, the proximity of books brought Sylvie comfort at the end. Is that true with you as well?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think of it as I am always listening to a book and reading a different book. I can't deal with the world without at least one fictional world that I'm also in as a reader, and then another one that I'm writing. That only way that I can feel like balance or like okay is if I have like several fictional worlds going. And there's nothing better for me than reading starting a book and realizing that I love it, and that I'm reading it at every moment and I can't wait to find out what happens next, and all I want to do is be in that world. Like I'm so grateful to that book and that writer when that happens. It's just like joy for me. So, I mean, that's always been the case as a reader. And as I get older, I just appreciate it more and more. Yeah,
I agree. Best feeling ever. All right. Greg has a question and I'll go ahead and let him ask it.
Thanks, Laura Beth. And thank you for just providing hours of entertainment for me with your novels. This has been really insightful and kind of helped to really grow my appreciation of them even more. My question is around, you mentioned kind of early on, Julia and Rose, kind of the characters that you don't really have a piece of yourself in. What's your process for writing those characters? Do you have people that you base them on? Do you have kind of like alpha readers, is like, does this sound right for someone like this? Because I don't necessarily identify with them as much. What do you do?
I don't, well, hey, you have amazing bookshelves behind you. It's like, that's,
It's fake.
it's like distracting. Is it? Oh my God, it's so cool. That's very cool. I don't know when I start, like, what makes these people tick. It's kind of like, I knew there were 4 sisters. I knew Cecilia was going to be an artist. I knew that Julia was bossy, like I knew that Sylvie worked in the library, but it's only as I write them and like sort of like get a deeper sense of who they are that I get to the place where I even know what their DNA is. So when I'm walking into them, I don't, and that's not something that I'm seeking out. I'm not trying to write characters that I feel like I'm inside or, that share personality traits or anything with me. It's just that that's how this worked out in this book. So by the time that I figure out that they're not connected to me in that way, it's pretty far into the book and I already really care about them. And I would say, like, for Julia and Rose, I know there are people in my life, and I think it's a fairly common, tact which I fully understand and empathize with, where life is chaotic and scary and a certain type of person really wants to control it, to like fix everything, to control everything, to like play movie director and be like, you should do this, you should do that. And then they feel calm and safe because they're making the world what they want it to be. And of course, that doesn't really work in the end, but I'm related to people that are like that. And, I've seen it. So once I got there, even though that's not who I am, I felt like I understood it well enough via the other people in my life. But then it's when it's really when those characters are in moments of great change that it's a challenge if I don't share their DNA.
Great question, Greg. Thank you so much. All right. We have more questions. Mary Ellen, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go ahead.
You're muted, Mary Ellen.
I love your t-shirt. You're still muted. All right, while she's figuring that out, I'm going to ask one that came in the chat box to me. This one says, I'm curious about the cover. Is this a character in the book?
Well, yeah. The idea is that it's one of Sylvie's murals and the women's faces that she paints on the walls. I think it's one of the sisters. I think it's Sylvie, but I don't know that. Basically, I think it's one of the strong women that Cecilia paints.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, Mary Ellen, can you unmute, or do you want? If not, I'm going to come back to you and we'll see if we can get you the next time. All right, here we go. Let's go with the next one. Viv, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's nice to meet you both. So this is the first book I've read of yours. And so my question is, do you think being on Oprah's book club, how has that changed your following and your readership? Because I know that's how I found this book. And after reading it, I definitely am adding Dear Edward on my list for next. So has that impacted this journey at all?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the power of Oprah it's like a whole nother scale, which I never would have anticipated. And I certainly, there are people who had never heard of me, millions and millions of people had never heard of me. And now some of them have because of Oprah. I'm very grateful. Like no one has done more to democratize reading over the last, 30 years than Oprah Winfrey. And I'm like deeply grateful and honored to be a recipient of her love of books. Like, she doesn't stop shouting about it. And that's, extraordinary. I feel so grateful.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful too, because that's how I found you. So
yeah, well, it makes sense to me. Don't know how anyone else did. My last book was Jenna book club pick on the Today Show, and that was amazing too. And Jenna also is spectacular for promoting reading and books, and she has wonderful taste. And so I've been very, very lucky. But Oprah is like not a real human being. It's like a whole different scale of exposure.
Thank you for that great question, Viv. All right, we have another one. Erin Rose, we're going to try to get to all of these. Go ahead.
I think the Barlins were channeling me a little bit, or I was channeling them. So I'm going to change my question a little bit since they have something similar. It's, what are you reading right now? And what book was a life-changing book for you?
Okay. Well, first I have to recommend one of my best friends. I have two writers that I went to graduate school with who are still my first readers today, and that's 28 years. Hannah Tinty is one, and she wrote a wonderful novel that came out a few years ago called The 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley, which is amazing. And then Helen Ellis is the other one, and she has a book that just came out last week, which is called Kiss Me in the Coral Lounge. We're very different writers. This is a book of humorous essays about her happy marriage, and it's hysterical. And she's also like a very, very good writer. So there's like substance to them too, but she reads the audiobook. It's like 3 hours long. I highly recommend it. I'm also reading, I just finished Babel by R.F. Kuang. She has a new book out right now called Yellowface that I haven't read yet, but Babel, I'm not sure how to say it properly, is amazing, fascinating. I mean, God, that woman is brilliant, and she's like 25 years old. And I'm also reading an old novel called Duncton Wood by William Harwood that is kind of in the line of like Wind in the Willows or Lord of the Rings. It's about moles, which sounds insane, but it's a beautifully written book. So I'm reading that one right now too. And books that changed my life. I mean, there are novels that I've loved so much that I feel like they've expanded my heart and soul, but it's hard for me to look at a novel and say that changed my life. But I mean, I read a book by Jonathan Safran Foer called Eating Animals that came out like 15 years ago, and it made me stop eating animals. And that certainly, I only read it because I love his fiction. He wrote Everything is Illuminated, and a couple very big, he's a wonderful fiction writer. And so I read his nonfiction book, and then I was like, oh no, why did I read this? And it certainly changed my life. And there's probably a handful of others, but I feel like it's nonfiction that sort of, like can turn your brain and actually change your life. And then fiction, in best case scenario, it grows my empathy, compassion, knowledge, it's wonderful, but I don't know that it, changes my life, so to speak. Yeah. I mean, some of the books that I would say Dear Edward changed my life, but that's, my own book.
Thank you for that question, Erin Rose. And just to follow up, she was talking about the Barlins in the chat box. They were wanting to know your favorite basketball book. What was that? Do you have a that you can recommend for those fans?
Great question. Yes, I read all of them. And the best basketball nonfiction book is by David Halberstam, who won like the Pulitzer Prize or something for like his books, I think, about like the Vietnam War. But he also wrote a lot about basketball. He wrote a really fascinating book about Michael Jordan, even though he wasn't given access to Michael Jordan, but he was allowed to talk to people around him. But the best book that David Halberstam wrote, and the best basketball nonfiction book I've read, is called The Breaks at the Game, which is actually mentioned in Hello, Beautiful. Arash speaks of it to William, and it's great. It's about like the 1977-78 Portland Trailblazers season when Bill Walton was there, but got horribly injured. But he's like enmeshed in the team, and it's so well written, and it's just fascinating, and it's so good.
Thank you. All right, we're going back. Mary Ellen, do you want to close us out?
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I'm zooming on my phone. I don't know any of the controls on the phone, and we have a power outage here. So
that's dedication. That's dedication.
Yes.
Anyway, I just wanted to tell you how much I love this book. When you were describing earlier how like you'd love to have a book that brings you joy and is immersive, and that was this book to me. I had such a book hangover when I got done with this. So thank you for that. And then this question kind of touches on two other questions, but what authors have most influenced you or shaped you as a writer or even as a person?
Okay, great question. I mean, the writer Dani Shapiro, who had a book come out last year called Signal Fires, she was one of my professors in graduate school, and actually took her twice during graduate school because she was such a great teacher. So she doubtlessly had she had a really good, really huge impact on me. And it was in her class that I met my two friends who are my two readers to this day. And then I read Ann Patchett very early. Like I read Ann Patchett basically when her first book came out. I can't remember if that's The Magician's Assistant or another one. Sorry, you're having a lot of technical problems, Mary Ellen. Sorry.
Yeah.
So Ann Patchett, when I read her as a young woman and an unpublished young woman, I thought like the writer that I had in college who ran our writing program was a writer named Blanche McCrary Boyd. And she's a Southern writer, and she wrote The Revolution of Little Girls, which was a pretty big book in like the 1990s. And she was like a super cool, larger than life lesbian who wore cowboy boots and like Stetsons and drove a Camaro and wore aviator shades even in class. And I looked at her and thought, there's no way I could be that cool. Like I couldn't possibly, like I can't be a writer if like writers are that freaking awesome and, you know, iconoclastic. But when I read Ann Patchett, probably whatever stupid part of my brain, I'm like, her name is Ann too. And she's like very plain and normal in demeanor and experience. And I was like, I loved her books. And for some reason, she's only a few years older than me. And I was like, maybe I can do that. So she had a big impact on me then. John Irving, like I was like, please let me live inside these novels, like The World According to Garp and A Widow for 1 year. These books that I read, you know, when I was in my 20s. The short story writer Raymond Carver, I read his short story Cathedral when I was in college, and I literally felt like my brain blew open. I couldn't believe that a story that simple could do what that story does. I highly recommend seeking out that story if you haven't read it. Henry James, actually, I was obsessed with when I was in college as well. There's, you know, the list is so long, but like the contemporary writers, I would say Irving and Patchett made me feel like that was a path that I wanted to walk down, and like I was someone boring like me could walk down. Shy/boring.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, for that question. I'm glad you stuck with it and had enough power on that phone. So, and I will say you're not boring. Just I don't believe that for one bit at all. And
introverted, shy, all those things.
Yeah, that may be, but whatever you are, we love it and we appreciate what you do for fiction, and this novel was just absolutely beautiful and so touching. I also want to say thank you for the LGBTQ representation, especially during this month, this Pride Month, and hopefully people will recommend when they're looking for, you know, a Pride represented book. This will be one that is in that list. Thank you, Ann, so much. I know that there was one question that we didn't get to that I always love is there anything you're working on right now that you can share with us at all? Or is it still in that 9 months of thinking that you can't quite get there for us?
Well, the 9 months ended actually like June 1st. So I've started writing the new thing. It's literally like 10 pages long so far. And I mean, I can say that the obsession that led me into this book is trees. So I read The Overstory by Richard Powers last summer, which is a spectacular novel that probably most of you have read. And in a way that kind of like changed me, because then when I finish a book that I love, I immediately go onto the internet and try to read everything I can about the writer and read everything that they've said about the book and like listen to any podcast they were on. And I did that for Richard Powers when I finished the book. And he talked in a number of interviews about how he feels like it's the responsibility of the contemporary fiction writer to broaden our sense of writing a more diverse world, which of course is incredibly important, to expand it even to include the world that we live on and in, and to write about the stories and the narratives of our physical world as well as the human world on top of it. And I really felt that, and that's a necessary step for the consciousness raising that we need to do as human beings if we want to continue to be human beings on this earth. And so I took that to heart, and I've been thinking a lot about that. And so this new book certainly has trees in it, and I really can't talk about it more than that because I can't, it's all like ephemeral, cobwebby still, and I can't, if I put it into words, it's gonna like die on me.
Well, we can see your passion just from your energy right now, and we're going to be looking forward, excited for those 10 pages, and wish you well on this journey. Thank you again so much for joining us tonight. Everybody check out her Instagram page, her website for the latest news, and hopefully we'll get to hear more about this novel as it progresses. Would love for everyone to follow the LBs, the Lover of Books, on Facebook and Bookstagram. And you can find out reviews, recommendations, and of course, more author chats on Sunday, June 23rd at 8 p.m. We're shifting gears again, and I'm hosting Amy Popel, author of The Sweet Spot. This was a recommended book if you were on the author chat with Julie Clark for The Lies I Tell. Remember, that was a book that she recommended. So we're going to be headed there. And just a week after that, we're going to be heading to talk to Stacey Willingham for her sophomore novel, All the Dangerous Things. So hopefully you can get those books. The Washington Post says about The Sweet Spot, it's a smart, sparkling, and very funny. Don't let it slip past you unread. It's a novel set in the heart of Greenwich Village, where 3 women form an accidental sorority when a baby belonging to exactly none of them lands on their collective doorstep. So join us for that. If you know of an author chat that you would like to have, please let me know. And subscribe to my YouTube. If your power went out and you missed part of this chat, you can always go back and watch part of that. But I have 28 videos uploaded right now, so you might find some books that you've read in the past. And just like Ann suggested, you can deep dive into those and see what those authors say as well. And you are just fantastic, and we love you so much, and so happy that you were here tonight, and appreciate all that you give to us for fiction. And we're going to put you right up there with Oprah and Jenna. And I mean, you really championed so many authors tonight with their books as well. So we appreciate you.
I should say I'm doing another mini tour in July. So if you go to my website and events, there's some places that I'm going to be talking about Hello Beautiful in person if you happen to live near them and you want to come.
That's even better. Are you going to be signing maybe at those possibly?
Yeah. Speaking and signing. I'll personalize awesome. Whatever.
Well, thank y'all so much, everybody, for joining. I hope everybody has a great night, and I'll see you more towards the end of July. Everybody have a great one. Bye.
Thank you, Laura Beth.